This video is brought to you by 101 board games to try before you die of boredom. My newest book. Please go pre-order it at your local bookseller right now. It's available for pre-order worldwide. Kia ora koutou, and welcome to this very special video presentation from 3 Minute Board Games. Now, a lot of you might not be aware of this, but the amount of work that goes into a standard 3-minute review on this channel is quite considerable. In our normal reviews, we don't use video as such. We tend to use stop motion photography. So most of what you see in a normal 3-minute board games review is me animating a bunch of pictures that I've taken. 100 or more per video. Now, all those photos and all that setup takes a lot of time, as does all the editing and the script writing, all that kind of stuff that goes around making those 3-minute videos so packed full of information. I also try to play every game we review in that format a whole bunch, so I'm confident answering any questions you have and that I can distill the rules into the most efficient format possible. All of that takes a lot of time in terms of play, in terms of taking the photos, in terms of writing the script, and in terms of editing it into its final compact package. So some of you might not be aware that 3-minute board games is not my full-time job. My full-time job's actually looking after our daughter. So most of the work on the channel occurs either when she's at kindergarten, when she's asleep in the evenings, or on the weekends when Steph gets me some time so I can pop out here and shoot videos like this. And as a result, I have to be very picky about what games go into the 3-minute format, because of all the work required to get them over the line. There are several things that will result in a game not getting the 3-minute board games treatment. The first one is that the game is too simple. A lot of very simple games don't need to be broken down into the 3-minute format because they're already simple enough and anyone can do a short review of them. As a result, I would feel that that video would be a bit of a filler video and not necessarily very useful to anyone out there. The second reason is the game's just not popular enough. We are a free-to-air channel. I don't charge for our reviews, and doing a game that gets lots and lots of views like a Gloomhaven or a Seven Wonders or a Wingspan makes the channel a lot more money in ad revenue than, say, Derricka, a game that I picked to do for a review because I thought it was a really neat and interesting and novel game. Doing big popular games allows me to pick a couple of smaller ones to focus on every now and then. But there's an awful lot of games coming out each year, and a lot fall below that threshold of interest. The third reason I might not cover a game is it just doesn't have any interest anymore. It might be an older game, it's something that might have been surpassed, it might have an old edition, it might have been reinvented into a far more popular version. Either way, the game just doesn't have any currency these days. It's not like it's an old classic or an evergreen that people are continually playing. There might be some interest in the game out there, but it's not enough to warrant putting it on the channel and putting all that work into it. And the fourth and final reason is that the game's trash, and I don't want to spend any more time with it. Sometimes I play a game and I'm just like, I don't want to spend another 12 working hours taking photos and editing this because this game is horrible. So those are the main reasons things don't get on the channel. And today I'm going to review a bunch of the games that did not make the cut for those reasons. Some of these games are very good. A couple are even great. Most of them are somewhat mid and a few of them are god awful. So join me on this roller coaster ride where I run through a whole bunch of games that did not make the cut for regular reviews, but I'm going to review them anyway in this shorter format. And I'm going to do these games in the order of how many owners they have on Board Game Geek, starting with the game with the most owners and finishing with the game with the least. That way the big and more popular titles are loaded towards the front. And you're gonna have to stay to the end to see the weird and wacky ones. So without any more delay, let's move on to the reviews. So on top of that, I'm also going to do this as a tier list. At the top, we've got Gold Medal Game. Next one down, Great Game that I'm keeping. Then we have Flawed Games that I'm gonna keep anyway. Good games that are not for me. Games that are meh. And games I want to fire into the sun. First up, we have an exceedingly popular game, and the only reason this one hasn't got the 3-minute board game treatment is that its rules are just too simple. I'd run out of things to say very, very quickly. That game is, of course, one of my favorite party games, Just One. Just One is a cooperative party game where each round, one player has a word in front of them that they can't see. The other players have to write down clues to help them guess what that word is. The trick is, those clues cannot be duplicates, and any duplicates are removed before the player with a hidden word gets to see them. Just One is a game for 3 to 7 players, and it's a very simple game.
Just One is a game that practically anyone can play or participate in. And while it does say that there's a max player count of 7, Just One could work with 7 tables of players, with each table coming up with a clue. It's one of the easiest games in the world to teach, and it should only take you about 60 seconds to explain everything the game has to offer. Like a lot of party games, this is very group dependent. And some players will really not like being put on the spot and being the clue guesser. It can make some people very, very nervous and tense when they're put on the spot like that. And also make them feel a bit dumb when they don't get the right answer. A fantastic and accessible party game. Alright, let's go to the tier list, and the first game we have is Just One, and Just One goes into the gold medal game list. Just One is neat. It is a neat party game. It's a party game that's going to stay in my collection for a very long time. It knows what it is, and it doesn't do anything more. It's just great.
Here's a game that was really innovative and interesting when it came out, the Manhattan Project. The main reason I'm not looking at this one despite its popularity is that this version can really only be found secondhand, and there's been later games in the series that have far surpassed it. Still, the Manhattan Project is a pretty influential game.
It's a game for 2 to 5 players, and it's a moderately complex game. The Manhattan Project is a worker placement game where you are competing superpowers trying to build up a massive nuclear arsenal. You will place workers, conduct espionage, build and test bombs, and ultimately try to build the biggest arsenal of all. The Manhattan Project is an interesting take on worker placement and a game that has spawned some great sequels. Each turn you'll either place a worker or pick up all your workers, and this can lead to your workers being out of sync with everyone else's. And the timing of when you place and when you pull your workers off the board is integral to winning the game. Manhattan Project is more aggressive than most worker placement games, and you can tactically occupy spots on the board for extended periods of time, while also conducting airstrikes on your opponents. The game end is triggered once one player reaches a certain score threshold, and I like that this makes the game feel like a race to a finish line, rather than just a game that ends when it ends. I've played 2 other games in the series, Energy Empire and 2 Minutes to Midnight, and I think those games are just better games. There's some really neat ideas introduced in the original Manhattan Project, but I think they are implemented better in Energy Empire and 2 Minutes Till Midnight. Building weapons of mass destruction is also not everyone's cup of tea. And being a very nasty cutthroat worker placement game, you have to be in a very specific mood to want to play a game of Manhattan Project. Next game up we have Manhattan Project, and I'm going to put that in good game, just not for me. As I said, I've got Manhattan Project 2 and Energy Empire. I don't feel I need the original Manhattan Project anymore.
Next up we have a pretty popular and robust game about mountain climbing, K2. This game's quite a successful one, but to me it's also a little bit boring. That and the fact that it's quite old means I just don't have the interest of putting the original on the channel.
It's a game for 1 to 5 players, and it's a reasonably simple game. K2 is a competitive game about mountain climbing. The game lasts for 18 days, and the winner is the player with the most points, and you get points for climbing the mountain. K2 is an interesting game, with an element of resource management and pushing your luck. You can't just blitz your way up the mountainside. You'll need to acclimatize at various points up the mountain, otherwise the weather effects and oxygen starvation will certainly hurt your climbers. And it's how you manage this risk and the terrible weather on K2 that determines whether you win the game or not. You get some limited knowledge on what weather is coming up, so you have the opportunity to plan around that, whether you camp up and ride it out or whether you push your luck and continue to climb. And as you climb up the mountain, there's less spaces for players, so competition over getting into the right position becomes really intense. While this game is a competition, it's quite indirect. You can block spaces, but that's about it. Sometimes, due to the nature of how the scoring in the game works, you can see who's going to win quite a way off as well. The game does have some pacing issues, and you will feel a lot of the time like you're just hunkering down and waiting for the weather to pass to build up your acclimation to the mountain. And while that's all tactical and part of the game, it can feel a little dull when you just go, I guess I'll stay here this turn. Alrighty, we've got K2, and I think that is another example of a good game, just not for me. I find K2 a little bit boring. It's a perfectly fine game. I know it's got lots of fans out there. I just find it a little bit dull.
Next we have The Pursuit of Happiness, which is quite an intriguing game. One of the issues I have with this though is I got this second hand about 10 years ago, and it's a Kickstarter version of the game, and I have no idea what's in this box that wouldn't be in a regular retail box. And I feel like doing a video on a game that's Kickstarter was about a decade ago and showing people stuff they probably just can't get anymore seems a bit rude.
It's a game for 1 to 4 players, and it's a moderately complex game. The Pursuit of Happiness is about living the best life you can. Each player's character will have a life goal, and through the course of the game you'll try to study, play, and influence your way through to completing that goal. The Pursuit of Happiness is modern gaming's take on the game of life. Instead of being roll and move though, it's all about how you allocate your time and set the priorities for your character. How hard you work, how hard you study, and how hard you play determines whether you complete your life goals or not. The game has a real sense of progression, and you feel like your characters are achieving things as you move along. It's the only game I've seen that simulates a lifetime and does it in a fun, short way. Sometimes a game can be a little bit grim though. I mean, the game ends with your character dying for starters. And quite often in the mid-game you can be going, well, I guess I'll spend my one free time unit on having some fun. That, combined with the stress track, does mean it feels a little too grim and real at times. And I played one game where the winner's goal was to accumulate as much wealth as possible. Their character was utterly miserable and died with lots of money, and they won life. And we're not sure that's the kind of game I want to play again. After all, the game's called The Pursuit of Happiness, not The Pursuit of Capital. Next we have The Pursuit of Happiness, and yep, this is also going into good game, just not for me.
This one's Feudum. I said sometimes there are games that the rules are too simple. This is the opposite case. The work required to condense Feudum down to 3 minutes just simply wasn't worth it. Every time I put this one on the table, people would start glazing over during the rules teach. It's opaque, it's convoluted, it's complex, and it's a little bit odd. This is not a game that I successfully managed to table and complete plays of. So yeah, this one's getting skipped because I just couldn't find the right people to play and test it with.
It's a game for 2 to 5 players, and it is a very complex game. In Feudum, you play a banished lord who has arrived in a strange land. It's your goal and your ambition to seize as much power as you can over 5 epochs. Can you manipulate the guilds and outmaneuver your rivals to become the most venerated lord in the kingdom? Feudum has a really unique art style. It's got an ambitious design that does a whole lot of things other games don't. It's got a really neat guild system that has 6 guilds that are highly interactive. When you impact one guild, it flows on to the next guild, and that continues all the way around the board in a circle. The core decision point in the game is you've got 11 action cards and you have to decide which 4 to use each turn. That gives you tons of options, but very much makes it so you can't do everything. It's a genuinely unique game that is not comparable to anything else. Teaching the game takes a lot of time, and you need to pay attention for the better part of 30 minutes or more for that. The game board frequently favours form over function, with some features on the map being difficult to pass. It really does require a committed group that want to give it a ton of plays to get the best out of it. The rules also have tons of exceptions and edge cases, so it's going to be a couple of plays before you feel very comfortable with it. And it's very easy for new players, especially to get lost while playing the game and not really having a clear path to victory. Overall, it's one of those games that takes a lot of time and commitment to get the best out of it. For the right people, this is a Grail game. For most people, it's a little too much and it's a little too opaque. Next up, we have Feudum, and again, that's going into good game, just not for me. As I said, I think there's a lot in Feudum that people will love. It's just too much, too intense for me to get into, and I just don't think the juice is worth the squeeze, as they say.
Next up, we have Hidden Leaders, the first game on this list I got a review copy for. As I say, I like to push out games that I get review copies for, and I don't like to leave them lying around and not reviewing them. I try not to take more games on than I can get to, but the last couple of years with having Anne and, childcare and all that kind of stuff, plus the books and games design, I have taken on more games than I've been able to get to. And Hidden Leaders just fell through the cracks. Again, possibly because it's a smaller box game and there were other big ticket items in its way, but this is one I probably should have done a proper review for and didn't get to it.
We'll take the role of one of 6 different hidden leaders. Each leader is aligned to 2 different factions. There is a central conflict track, and the final position of markers on that track determines which of these factions win. The winner is the player whose 2 factions have comparatively done best. Hidden Leaders is a fast-playing game. Each player has hidden factions, and you win by completing their faction goals. So each player has a very clear line of sight on what they need to do to win. The faction goals are also shared, so each player will be pushing the public trackers up and down. This makes the game very interactive. As far as I'm aware, every card in the game is unique, and that's pretty cool. And the unique card play does lead to some fun interactions. It's not a deep game by any means, and despite having hidden leaders, there seems to be almost no incentive not to push for your goals in a somewhat obvious way. There's far less bluffing and mind games than you would expect from a game called Hidden Leaders. And I'm legitimately unsure if the game would play all that differently if you had your open leaders on the table. Next we have Hidden Leaders, and for me that game's a solid meh. I played it a couple of times. It didn't really do much for me. So that's going in the meh category.
Next up we have Brewcrafters, another Kickstarter game from about a decade ago that, while it's a perfectly fine game, I'm not sure anyone's interested in hearing a new review about it. We'll find out.
It's a game for 2 to 5 players, and it's a rather complex game. It's the 2010s and everyone is getting into craft beer. Can you build up your own brewery, create exotic beers, and become the best new brewer in town? In Brewcrafters, everything you do feels like it's a legitimate part of the beer making process. From how you acquire ingredients, to researching new brewing techniques, and selling beers to people that sound utterly revolting. You know, par for the course for craft beer. It's a very solid worker placement game for its time, and remains one of the tighter economic cottage industry games I've played. For most people though, viticulture will be a similar and more open and accessible experience than Brewcrafters. Visually, it's a little MS Paint in a few places, and a second edition with some nicer art would be neat, but that's only if the game had enough interest behind it. Alright, now we've got Brewcrafters, and Brewcrafters, oh, it's another one going in the good game, just not for me. I think this is a very good game, I just think it's also a bit dated, and I've got other games that do similar things, so this is another one I'm going to get rid of.
Next up we have a game I backed on Kickstarter, Lawyer Up. The reason I backed this game is I was a big fan of the designer and publisher's previous work, Maximum Apocalypse. The reason it's in this review now is because I just never got around to doing the video for it. Because every time I would look at doing a video for Lawyer Up, I'd have something else that I'd received a review copy of that just got priority over it. I tend to put more emphasis on review copies I've got, getting them out the door and getting them reviewed, than I do reviewing games that I actually paid money myself for. So yeah, Lawyer Up, classic example of a game that probably should have been on the channel a couple of years ago, but just slipped through the cracks, so I'm going to talk about it now.
It's a game for 1 or 2 players, and it's a moderately complex game. In Lawyer Up, you will be either the prosecution or the defense. Can you sway the members of the jury with arguments and get the verdict you desire? Lawyer Up does a great job of playing out a courtroom drama. Not necessarily a real courtroom. It's definitely more Ace Attorney than 12 Angry Men. I really like the discovery system in the game, where you prepare the game decks by drawing 3 cards, keeping one, handing one to your opponent, and burying the third. It adds a great decision point, great tension, and makes the cases more replayable. The real gold here though is the card play, and how the mechanics make it feel like a back and forth argument. Really fun, and each win over a witness or juror feels rewarding. The way the game is sold is a bit piecemeal, with the core box only having 2 cases, and the other cases being sold separately. It's a dueling game as well, which tends to be the type of game I play least at the moment. And the rulebook being like this is a pet peeve of mine. I have man hands, and tiny book is tiny.
Okay, now we have Lawyer Up, and that's going to go into Great Game, A Keeper. I really want to give this one a bunch more reps. I think it's a very neat game, and I'm intrigued to give it a little bit more of a go. And if I do like it, and I do get it played a bit more, I am also thinking about getting the expansion content for it as well. I do really like the back and forth in Lawyer Up, and I think it's a very clever game that does what it sets out to do very well. Next up we have Godspeed, a game I got secondhand from a Kickstarter backer, so it has a whole bunch of Kickstarter exclusives and stuff in it. This was one that I got, I think, in 2020 or 2021, about when our life dramatically changed because my daughter was born. I'd picked up a whole bunch of games that year that I was intending on reviewing and got to about a quarter of them. So Godspeed has sat on the shelf along with a bunch of other games for a number of years, and it's just, the cheese has moved. It's now 5 years past when this came out. I just don't think there's that much interest in this title anymore.
It's a game for 2 to 5 players, and it's a moderately complex game. In Godspeed, the space race is heated up. Not because Neil Armstrong landed on the moon, but because a portal was discovered to a new world. The game is played through 3 phases, a negotiation phase, a bidding phase, and a worker placement phase. Having to manage your resources through these phases is the key game challenge. It has a retro sci-fi futuristic theme leading into an old history Cold War space race. And that's kind of an odd theme. However, the competing goals in the game are nice and brutal, and you only get points for being in first place. It is a bit of a conceptual mess. The box art makes it look like a survival horror game. And then the art in the game itself is very dinky, and the components include big scoring plastic crystals. It's a pretty weird game, but one that doesn't stand out mechanically or artistically for me. Now we have Godspeed, and that's kind of going in the meh category. Yeah, no, it's probably a good game, just not for me. Especially considering I got the Kickstarter version, it was quite pricey. I feel a bit let down putting this one here, but it is what it is.
Next up we have Vampire the Masquerade Vendetta, a game I picked up in retail. And the reason I picked this up is, you might not know this, but my game, Shadow Moon Syndicates, started life as an experiment I had, a thought experiment, about what a Vampire the Masquerade board game would look like. So I created a Vampire the Masquerade board game, played it a bit, decided to make it something else, and that thing became Shadow Moon Syndicates. The reason I picked up Vendetta is I wanted to see what some other experienced game designers would do with a similar brief and how that game would end up. And it ended up pretty well, just not really my cup of tea. So yeah, I never picked this one up intending on reviewing it. So here's a review for it.
It's a game for 3 to 6 players, and it's a moderately complex game. In Vampire the Masquerade Vendetta, you are a vampire clan leader trying to become prince of the city. The Vampire the Masquerade setting is well implemented. Each of the clans feels like they should. The game plays quite quickly, going over 3 rounds, and has a nice combination of pushing your luck and resource management, with each player trying to do their best to get the limited new recruits on offer. The hand system, where you start with 2 starter cards and choose 1 extra per round, is quite neat, and it feels like you're choosing variable player powers rather than just picking cards. Personally though, I want something a bit more epic and involved for a game about Vampire the Masquerade. Vendetta is fast and furious, but it just didn't click with me personally, and I'm not finding it a keeper. I'm also not fond of how you can, in large player counts especially, just not win a damn thing during the resolution phase. And while the clan cards feel very thematic, the Frenzy and Diablerie systems where you run out of blood and eat your own cards is the opposite of thematic, and it's definitely the opposite of fun. Also, if you're not a fan of the vampire setting, I'm not sure there'd be much here for you. Vendetta. Yeah, this is... Ooh. Yep, no, it's another one going a good game, just not for me. As I say, I picked this up mostly to look at it from a board game design point of view. I like a lot of what it does, but it's just not my kind of game.
You might be picking up a theme here. There's a lot of games from around 2018, 2020 ballpark that I picked up, thought about doing reviews for, and just never got around to it. Spy Club is another one of those games. Steph and I really enjoyed playing Spy Club, but that was interrupted by pregnancy and all that kind of stuff, and we never really got back to it.
It's a game for 2 to 4 players, and it's a reasonably simple game. In Spy Club, you are the protagonist in a kid's adventure story, where your group of plucky kid detectives unravel a conspiracy going on in your small town. Spy Club is a campaign game, with each campaign consisting of 5 chapters. How you resolve your earlier games impact on the later ones. There's a ton of different modules in the game that make each playthrough feel quite unique. But the core gameplay is card manipulation, where the clue cards need to be moved about and arranged in set ways in order to advance the game's plot. The different story elements and the way they reinvent this core system are quite fascinating. But the core system is very basic, and you can get tired of it real quickly. Then the core gameplay becomes just busy work you need to do to advance the story, and that's not all that fun. Still, a game I'd like to try with my daughter once she's a little bit older. We have Spy Club. I'm putting Spy Club up in great game, A Keeper. This is one I really want to try with my daughter when she's a little bit older, because I like the whole kid adventures thing, and I think it'll be a really neat family game.
Next up, we have Judge Dredd: The Cursed Earth, a game I got for 2 reasons and 2 reasons only. 1, it's a solo game, and 2, it's about Judge Dredd, and I like me some Judge Dredd.
It's a game for 1 to 4 players, and it's a reasonably simple game. You are Judge Dredd, and you are the law. Can you complete your dangerous mission while exploring the Cursed Earth? This game is a rework of The Lost Expedition, a rather popular solo game about exploration and survival. And if you have played that game, there's very few mechanical differences between the two. If you've not played Lost Expedition, then this is a game all about resource management. You have 3 judges with skills and limited health, and each turn you have a set number of card encounters. These encounters will frequently have choices on them on what resources to spend for what gains or losses. Winning usually means you've managed those resources well and pushed your luck where you've needed to. The game has multiplayer modes, but for me it's very much a solo game with multiplayer as an add-on. It's also quite damned hard and unforgiving as a game, but it also feels quite abstracted to me, and the theme just doesn't quite fit, despite having official, high-quality Judge Dredd art. And we have Judge Dredd: The Cursed Earth, and flawed, but I'm keeping it anyway. I was probably a little harsh on this in the review, and I actually played it again after recording that bit, and I do actually quite like it. So it's not perfect, but I do like the Judge Dredd art. I do like that it is a Judge Dredd game, and that it's a solo game, and it's a small box. All of those things are kind of saving it from getting chucked.
Oh look, it's another moderately successful but not hugely successful game from the late 2010s. It's Scorpius Freighter. This one I picked up in a bargain bin, and I should probably stop doing that and thinking I'm going to get round to reviewing games, because games you tend to buy in bargain bins are games people aren't interested in seeing reviews of.
It's a game for 2 to 4 players, and it's a moderately complex game. In Scorpius Freighter, you are a starship captain trying to ship cargo and smuggle rare goods and information in an authoritarian sector. Can you be the most successful freighter pilot? In this game, you'll be taking actions with your crew cards to try to influence the board. The crew cards come in 7 different crews with different playstyles. You can develop and build up your ship, making it better at certain functions, but mostly you'll be picking up goods and trying to complete contracts to score points. The game has these 3 motherships cycling around the board that you don't directly control, but you can manipulate them, and they are very important. But it leads to the greatest disappointment about this game, when you pick up one of these ships and get excited, only to find out no, that isn't your ship at all. In fact, your ship never appears on the board, and all your actions are abstracted. I guess I expected something more like Firefly than what Scorpius Freighter actually is. And what it actually is a card-driven rondel game, where the motherships are just rondels you move around. Scorpius Freighter, this one is a solid meh. I didn't find anything particularly engaging about that, and I still feel a little betrayed about not being able to have one of those plastic ships as my ships.
Next up we have Wizards of the Grimoire, a review copy that was sent to me, and unfortunately this one's languished on my shelves for a very long time, possibly due to its quite nondescript box and the fact that it's a dueling game. Which is unfortunate, because I only got to play it for the first time a month ago, and it's pretty damn good. So I kind of feel bad for, snobbing Grimoire games and not covering their game earlier.
It's a game for 2 players, and it's a reasonably simple game. You are 2 wizarding protégés. Can you draw knowledge and power from a shared source and use those abilities better than your rival in this epic duel? This is a very clever drafting game, where each player starts with a blank slate and drafts cards from a central display. As you draft cards, you'll be building spell combinations. Lots of great interactions here, and it is a heck of a dueling game. There's some very clever stuff here, like how you place down mana cards to power up spells, but you can't reuse those spells until they're clear of mana cards. So to cycle through spells more effectively, you need to come up with ways to remove those cards, as you only get to remove 1 card from each spell at the end of each turn. And while it's a pretty good game for what it is very much just for 2 players. I would love a cooperative battler that uses elements of the card drafting and mana manipulation mechanics in this game though. If you are looking for a dueling game, you can do a lot worse. Right, let's rate Wizards of the Grimoire, and it's going straight up to great game, it's a keeper. This is a really neat dueling game. I probably need to play more dueling games. Steph and I just haven't done much of that lately, well, since Anne was born. But I think Wizards of the Grimoire is the sleeper hit here. And a very good game, and something I want to play more of.
Selsometimes people just give me games. Sometimes it's because they're moving house, or their lifestyles have changed, or they don't just do any more gaming anymore, and they can't be bothered, selling the games on. They think, hey, I'll just give Jared some games, see what he can do with them. And that's how I end up with garbage like Arkham Ritual.
It's a game for 3 to 7 players, and it's a moderately complex game. You are all investigators looking into a Lovecraftian cult, and you get trapped into a ritual, with no one else other than the other investigators, it seems. Can you get the right number on your head so you don't lose? In this game, you'll be holding 1 card. You don't know what it is, but everyone else does. On your turn, you will draw a card and pass it to someone, who will either blindly discard it or keep it. This might be the worst social deduction game I've ever played, as it's weirdly fiddly for what it is. Just save yourself the time and play Love Letter instead. It's not quite the same experience, but it is a lot more fun. Something about Arkham Ritual really makes players uncomfortable about what's going on in the game as well, and not in a fun, intense way, just in a this game is nonsense way. Absolutely awful and completely nonsensical. Arkham Ritual, fire it into the sun! This one should be hardly surprising. I found this to be a terrible game experience, and I never want to see this game again.
Here we have Planet of the Apes. I also found this one in a bargain bin, which is probably why it hasn't been reviewed on the channel. Still, this is a surprisingly good game, and if you're actually a big Planet of the Apes fan, if there is such a thing anymore these days, I highly recommend it. Pretty solid solo game. Just one that you'll never see mentioned anywhere else except for this review. It kind of bombed horribly, I think.
It's a game for 1 to 4 players, and it's a reasonably simple game. You are Colonel George Taylor, astronaut who is lost in space. You have landed on a planet dominated by damn dirty stinking apes. Can you find out where you are and what happened? While this game is primarily designed for solo, the co-op mode idea is absolutely genius. You're all playing different parts of Taylor's psyche, each with their own personal strengths and weaknesses, and I think that's really clever. At its core, it's a dice manipulation game where you're trying to solve story cards with dice rolls, while accumulating and spending assets that let you change and alter dice checks. You are constantly trying to advance to the end of the game with a limited amount of time as well. So the game has great tension. It also manages to nail the Planet of the Apes theme very well, without making it feel cheesy or kitsch. Well, more cheesy or kitsch than it already is. On the downside, it 100% feels like a solo game, and I never really played it with other people as a result, despite having that clever co-op idea. And if chucking dice and using effects to re-roll them isn't your thing as well, you won't like this. You'll be shocked to know it's by Richard Launius, the original designer of Arkham Horror, the king of thematic dice chucking co-ops, and it really shows. But yeah, this is a pretty good game. Probably no one played because Planet of the Apes is just not an IP anyone cares about anymore. Planet of the Apes. Flawed, but probably keeping it anyway. I've tried selling this for 3 years. No one wants to buy it. I don't feel it's bad enough to throw in the tip or recycle or just give away to a donation store or something. If someone wants to give me 20 or 30 bucks for it, I'll give it to them. But until then, I think I will keep Planet of the Apes. I will put it up for sale, but if no one buys it, I won't be too distraught.
This is 1969. It's another donated game. I don't think I need to say much more about that.
It's a game for 2 to 5 players, and it's a reasonably simple game. You are a superpower engaged in the space race. Can you outrace your opponents to victory? In 1969, you will hire different scientist cubes from a central pool, and then use them to complete missions by rolling 5 dice, and why am I still talking? This is a very average push-your-luck game that looks and feels about 30 years old. The fact this was published in 2012 and not 1995 continues to stagger me, as everything about this game looks and feels archaic. 1969 is a bit of a nothing game, and while there's a neat idea there with the different scientist types and how they work, the game really does end up being roll well and you win, roll bad and you don't. Far too much for my liking. There are so many good games about the space race, and 1969 ain't one of them. 1969, well, that one gets fired into the sun as well. Absolutely terrible. I did not find anything particularly redeeming in this game, and it's just ugly. I don't think I'll be able to sell this one at all, so unfortunately this might end up in landfill or just getting donated to a thrift store.
Sometimes I'll take review copies for games that I'm pretty sure aren't going to be commercial successes. Mostly because I want to see if they're going to be a hidden gem or not. And that was the case with The Warp. I looked at what they were doing and I thought this could be a really, really great game. And even if not every small game gets reviewed on the channel, I'm still going to occasionally pick up ones that look intriguing just to see if they have that special something.
It's a game for 1 to 4 players, and it's a rather complex game. You are the leader of 2 alien species working together in this 4X game. Can you explore, expand, exploit, and exterminate your way to victory? I really wanted to like The Warp, as I've been looking for 4X games that can topple Twilight Imperium, which I find way too clunky for quite a while. The Warp is not that game, however. There are some cool ideas here. Probably the best feature in the game is how you can take an action and the other players can follow it. The problem there is that's arguably done better in 2 other 4X adjacent games, Empires of the Void 2 and Arcs. Don't get me wrong though, The Warp is a solid enough game, but the 4X genre is one that requires significant time and player commitment, and there's only so many of those games I can cover each year. We gave this one go and it was just kind of mid. And with Twilight Imperium, Eclipse, Empire of the Void 2 and Arcs, there are way better options out there you can play. The Warp. That was a bit of a meh. I gave it a go, I gave it a shot, but it just wasn't the sort of game for me.
This is Dune, a game from Gale Force 9, a local publisher here in New Zealand. There was a time there where Gale Force 9 were putting out banger after banger, great game after great game, including such things as Spartacus, Tyrants of the Underdark, the Firefly game, and Star Trek Ascendancy. All games I think are pretty damn good. Then something happened and they started putting out games that weren't so good, and they were giving me a ton of review copies, and well, I just never got around to this one because it's brown and boring.
It's a game for 2 to 4 players, and it's a moderately complex game. You are the leader of a tribe of Fremen. Can you negotiate and fight your way to dominance? This feels like an old school cutthroat area control game, because it is. No one looks at the Dune setting and goes, you know what, I really want to play Fremen vaguely competing over water. That's what speaks to me about the setting. You know, no Sardaukar, no Atreides, no of the Harkonnen stuff, just Fremen fighting over water. And I personally can't think of a duller theme. And this is the third time this game has been made, and each prior version was a critical and commercial flop. I'm not sure how I got a second version, let alone a third. Oh, and we heard you like Shades of Tan, so here's this game. Very brown. Dated gameplay, dated game, boring looking art. Incredibly disappointed with this one. Dune Arrakis. Fire It Into the Sun. I found this a very, very dull, boring, lifeless kind of game. Incredibly dated and just kind of ugly and unpleasant.
This one's called Ruins of Mars, and I picked it up because it was about Mars. That's it. That's the only reason I bought this game. I didn't do any research whatsoever into what it was about, or what the mechanics were, or how popular it was. I just saw Mars and went, oh, I want to give that a go. And you know what? That's not a great reason to buy a game.
It's a game for 1 to 4 players, and it's a moderately complex game. You are archaeologists on Mars, studying alien ruins. Can you make the most significant discoveries of any team and win? This is an action selection game, where you'll select an action to take, gaining the bonuses below it, such as advancing on various language tracks or gaining resources. It's a reasonably simple gameplay loop that boils down to, which one of these 5 things do I want to do this turn? One real positive is each time you take an action, it moves one of these markers, making that action stronger, so following the previous player can be really beneficial. Some of the stronger actions will gain you radiation, and the player with the most radiation at the end of the game is punished, and that's pretty cool. But this one's on me for not doing my research and buying a game because it had Mars in the title. I don't like the alien technology on Mars theme. It's way too History Channel for me. It's also far too long for what it is. For Ruins of Mars to be the sort of game I'd recommend, it would need to be about half as long. We have Ruins of Mars. I guess a solid meh. It's not quite bad enough to Fire Into the Sun, but I don't think it's a particularly good game. It needs to be about half as long and twice as interesting.
Evolution Another World is a review copy, and they sought me out because they saw my review of Oceans, a game I really, really like, and they were like, hey, if you like Oceans, you'll love Evolution Another World. That's simply not true.
It's a game for 1 to 4 players, and it's a reasonably simple game. You are an animal on an alien world. Can you evolve to be the most successful life form on your planet? There are a ton of evolution games that seem to all have evolved out of the original Evolution, The Origin of Species from 2010. Another World might be the smallest and simplest of them. Each turn you will have the option to create a new creature or modify an existing one. But the most important thing to do is to keep your creatures alive. By keeping your creature full of power, by either gaining energy by passive means or attacking other creatures, you can stockpile enough energy that you can transmute. Do that 3 times and you'll win the game. It's all very simple for a game like this, but it's also a little bit meh at the same time. It's certainly not my favourite game in this evolution subgenre. For that, I'd pick Oceans, which to me is better in every way. I just can't get over the card art in this game either. It's just unpleasant in a way I can't quite describe. I get that the idea of taking evolution to an alien planet is a potentially interesting one, but right here, it falls quite flat. Evolution, that is a solid meh. It's fine, it's just kind of ugly, and there are other games around the evolution theme that are just better. And lots of them. It's not like there's just 1 or 2 evolution-based games that are good. There's a ton of them. Evolution Another World's just one of the weaker entries into the whole evolution subgenre.
This here is a game I won in a math trade. It's the Shadow Planet. Now, I'm terrible at math trades. I tend to give away very good games and get very bad ones in return. I should probably stop doing them, and in fact I have stopped doing them because I used to think, oh, I'm getting rid of 10 games. But then you're getting 10 games in return, and you're getting probably worse ones. And in the case of the Shadow Planet, we played this once, and it was a very confusing time, and I feel it would have been better just selling the previous game instead of trading for this.
It's a game for 3 to 5 players, and it's a moderately complex game. You are a member of a crew on a rescue mission to find a lost ship. What happened to it, and which one of you is now possessed by an alien being intent on destruction? Each player at the table will have a secret goal, and while there are 6 characters in the game, your control of them shifts each turn. Ideally, you will use those characters and maneuver them into positions to complete your hidden goals. It sounds like fun. In fact, it sounds a little bit like Stationfall. The art style is quite interesting, and I like the retro comic book feel of the game's visuals. It's a pity then that it's a complete mess. With drafting the hidden identities each turn, you end up somewhat randomly reallocating things on the board each turn, hoping that every step you took forward with the character you want to last turn doesn't get undone by someone taking 2 steps backwards with them. I get that hidden goals can be hard to implement and make work well, but this game in particular seemed more waffly than normal. So the gameplay loop here feels a little bit rudderless, a little bit directionless, and instead of feeling tense at the table, most of my players just felt confused. The Shadow Planet. This is a solid meh. No, it's bad enough to fire it into the sun. I'm sorry. It's just a bit of a convoluted mess. The way the hidden characters are implemented is just so chaotic and nonsensical that I never want to play this game again, and I never want to see it again. Yeah, I'm going to definitely sell this one on. Hopefully someone picks it up. Hopefully someone likes the comic book and the art style. I think there's a good game here if it just got developed slightly differently. They just tried to be way, way, way too clever, and it ended up being quite dumb.
Sometimes I get sent games like World Changers, and I tell them straight off the bat that this game is not going to get a full 3-minute board games review unless I absolutely adore it. That these games are destined to end up in a combination video at some point in the future. That's what happened with World Changers.
It's a game for 1 to 4 players, and it's a reasonably simple game. You are the captain of a spaceship and are assembling a crew based on the best people from humanity's history. Best crew wins. Despite a theme that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, World Changers is a fun and fast-paced card drafting and set collection game. Each turn you'll either play a card from hand, or draft one from the middle, or pass and activate powers on cards already in play. Each card represents a historic figure, and they are all unique and have different powers and ways to score them. It all plays out in about 15 minutes, and I do feel like there were some good choices in the game, but that theme just boggles my mind. It does have a nice small box though.
World Changers, that's a solid kind of meh. It's not much to write home about. Even for a small box game, I don't find it particularly interesting. That's why it didn't end up in my handbag video, because I just didn't think it was that interesting a game. Unrest is a review copy I got from Pandasaurus Games. Sometimes I pass on a game because it's not very good, sometimes it's because it's too simple, and sometimes it's because it's not very fun. Unrest is one of the rare occasions where I get to pass on it for all 3 of those reasons.
It's a game for 2 players, and it's a reasonably simple game. In a dystopian future, one player plays the resistance to a brutal, authoritarian regime that controls the world, and the other player is the brutal, authoritarian regime that controls the world. This is a head-to-head dueling game, where the rebel player is on the offensive and chooses to target 2 of the 5 Empire districts. They play cards, some face down, some face up, and then the Empire decides how they will counter. If things go well for the rebels, they can liberate the district, and the rebel players win if they can liberate 3 of the districts. The Empire wins if they don't. And here is the problem with the game. The gameplay loop for the rebel is fun, and the Empire just isn't at all. You get to react, you get to play a few tokens, and that's about it. Still, it's a fast and tight little game that feels a little like a game of Netrunner, but lacking any of the depth to that game. This feels like it should have been a solo game, because as a 2-player game, it's just a bit naff.
Next we have Unrest, and that is also a solid meh.
It's a good game for 1 player, and it's a fire into the sun for the other player, so that's why it ends up into the meh category.
So 3-minute board games stopped doing Kickstarter promotional videos a while back. We always did them as reviews, and they're always just reviews of prototypes. And for some companies like Garfield Games, who put out like very good quality prototypes that are virtually identical to the game you'll get in the end, it worked out quite nicely. But for most people, it was a bit of a pain. I did not request a copy of Wizards & Co. Review copy. It was sent to me along with Moon, and it is a promotional prototype, one that I can't freely sell onwards. So yeah, I got sent this to sort of, I guess, sneakily promote the Kickstarter. I didn't, but I am looking at it now.
It's a game for 2 to 4 players, and it's a reasonably simple game. You are a wizard, and so are your rivals. Can you outmaneuver them and claim the most gems while avoiding cursed items? There are multiple dungeons in the middle of the board, and each player will place monster cards into these dungeons. Once a dungeon is full up, a battle will take place, and they are the highlight of the game, as various card effects will trigger and resolve in order. The winners get the treasures, but it's your placement of cards that get you gems. And frequently, the best places are the ones that get the worst rewards. Wizards & Co. feels like a simplified version of Smash Up, with just set decks rather than combined ones with unique combinations. This is a good thing in many ways, as Smash Up can get a bit overblown for what it is. While this is not an amazing game, it is pretty solid for what it is.
Then we have Wizards & Co. That's a good enough game. It's fine. It's not for me. As I say, it's like a basic version of Smash Up. I would probably prefer to just play Smash Up than Wizards & Co. Because Smash Up has the fun faction interactions. Not much to say about Clash of Magic Schools. I can't actually remember requesting a review copy of this. It just kind of turned up. That sometimes also happens. You get onto like a mailing list for a company and they'll just send you some games and you might not necessarily have requested them. So I can't recall actually requesting this one. I may have, but yeah, it's Clash of Magic Schools.
It's a game for 2 players, and it's a reasonably simple game. You and your opponent are both students at different magical schools. Can you defeat your opponent in multiple challenges to become the champion? There are multiple arenas on the central board, and each player has a marker representing themselves. You'll move that marker to a location, and then assign student cards from your hand there. Once placed, students are tricky to move, and you need students to complete trials to score points, and sets of them to cast spells. The big problem though is I found the flow of the game to be a bit weird. You go through phases where you draw cards in order you wanted and things went well, and in other turns you had barely any options. It's also apparently a reskin of an older game called Babel. Overall though, Clash of Magic Schools is just pretty uninspiring, and I'm just not a fan of short games that effectively make you skip a turn frequently. Alright, Clash of Magic Schools. Absolutely meh. Might be the most forgettable game on this list.
Manifest. This was sent to me when I requested a review copy of Australia. It was like an extra game they put in the box on the off chance that I would review it. So I guess I'm reviewing it here. Publishers do this from time to time. They just kind of put a couple of extra games in the box hoping that you'll review them as well, even if you haven't agreed to them.
It's a game for 2 to 5 players, and it's a moderately complex game. You are a shipping company at the turn of the century. Can you move the most people and goods around the world? There are 2 versions of the rules, the simple family version and the advanced deck building one. I recommend playing the latter one with anyone other than small children. This is a card-driven pick up and deliver game where you are completing contracts. Each turn you play cards, move ships, and try to complete your goals. I like that the cards are multi-use. That's always a positive for me in games. The board and overall look of the game is okay too, and having 2 ships to control adds some nice decisions. It's fine enough, but there isn't anything remarkable here. A solid if slightly dull ship delivery game. Manifest. That's also kind of a meh game. It's okay. It probably could go up to good game, just not for me. Yeah, we'll be generous and put it up there. It's fine for what it is, but what it is isn't exactly earth-shattering or particularly interesting.
Strike is a game I backed on Kickstarter because of the idea behind it, and because I like firefighting co-ops, and because I like T.L. Simmons, the artist behind this game, because he did all this stuff for Block by Block. It was never really intended to be a game I would review on the channel, but I'm going to review it here anyway. It's a game for 2 to 4 players, and it's a reasonably simple game. In Strike, you must work together with the other players to cause a workers' revolution in a near-future dystopia. The corporation controls everything, and you win when you overthrow them. I really wanted to like this one more than I did. I like the theme, I like the art, and I especially like the smiley corporate robots your nemesis deploys. The gameplay is a pandemic-style firefighting co-op, where each round new baddies spawn in locations, and if you don't deal with them quickly, they'll get out of control. The problem is, it's the exact same gameplay loop and feeling in this game that you get from a game of Pandemic. Mechanically, it just doesn't do enough of its own to just not be Pandemic, but with more steps and less well-tuned. My favourite things, the art and the theme, are done much better in Block by Block Uprising. And if you like the look of Strike, I recommend getting Block by Block Uprising instead. Strike! Flawed, but keeping this anyway. Basically keeping it because I'm not going to really be able to sell it to anyone, and it's the kind of game I can play with a certain group of people who are interested in political games. Also, at some point I might want to do a video on games of this kind of theme, so I think I'll keep it around there, less for the quality of the game and more as an academic curiosity. This here is buffer time, and it teaches us a great rule as reviewers. Don't just jump on a game because it has characters on it that you like. It's a game of 2 to 6 players, and it's a very simple game. You are the members of the lower decks, the Star Trek shipmates who get the worst jobs. Can you do the minimum work required and have the most amount of leisure time to win? I like the lower decks. I found it to be a refreshing take on Star Trek with just the right amount of irreverence to the source material. It was a fan series for those who don't treat Star Trek canon like it's a holy book. Buffer Time, on the other hand, is just a bad game. What is truly remarkable about Buffer Time is how it overstays its welcome despite being playable in about 10 minutes. That's an amazing experiment in time dilation. Its actual gameplay is pushing your luck, drawing cards until you've had enough points or you bust or fail. There's a tiny amount of influence you can have on this outcome, but fundamentally you draw good cards, you'll win, and if you don't, you lose. It's barely a game as far as I'm concerned. The lower decks didn't deserve this. Buffer Time gets fired into the sun where it deserves to go. Buffer Time is bad. This is Space Marine Adventures Tyranid Attack. Games Workshop keeps sending me games. I don't think I've ever seen anything nice about them, but here we go. Space Marine Adventures, Tyranid Attack. Oh wait, I did say nice thing about Horror Heresy. That was pretty good.
It's a game for 1 to 4 players, and it's a reasonably simple game. You are a group of Space Marines heading onto a Space Hulk, where Tyranids are lurking ready to attack. Can you sweep the ship and get rid of them? Not much to say about Tyranid Attack. It's one of a gazillion Space Marine adventure games that have been put out by Games Workshop that all have the same number of nice Space Marine models in them. I played through it once using proxy models because I was reasonably sure the gameplay wasn't going to be worth the time it would take to assemble them. It's not! The game is passable introductory dungeon crawling fare, but this is a box of miniatures with a bonus game attached. Nothing more. Space Marine Adventures. Yeah, nice figures, completely meh game. Even for a Space Marine Adventures game, this one's pretty ordinary. It's actually quite a fun one where you're defending against orcs coming in at you from all directions. That's a good time. This one, it's just a rehashed, basic, baby's first Space Hulk. It's not very good.
Alien Pet Shop is a game I backed on Kickstarter. Unfortunately, only a handful of people backed this game on Kickstarter, so it never became very viable to do a full review of it.
Alien Pet Shop. In Alien Pet Shop, you're a pet shop owner. Try to train, breed, and sell a variety of exotic alien pets to your customers. I backed this one on Kickstarter almost entirely because of the artwork, and I don't actually regret doing that. I'm glad the game exists and the art got out into the world. It's nifty and fun. The game itself is a dice placement game where your worker dice get assigned to different places to help you get new pets, build habitats, and mutate them. The mutation tokens in particular are a nice touch, and the whole game is incredibly cute, but it's also very shallow. It's fun enough to play, and collecting different animals is cool and all, but you play a game of it, and you just have to ask yourself, is that all it's got? I'm keeping this one for when my daughter is a little bit older. Alien Pet Shop! Yeah, flawed, but keeping it anyway. Cute game, not a lot to it, but it's one I want to play with my daughter when she's a little bit older because it's a cutesy game.
This game is Tallywood Rally, and I did not ask for this one. This was included in a box along with everything for Bardwood Grove. I have reviewed Bardwood Grove, and that video should be coming out roughly about the same time as this one, either a little bit before or a little bit after. But Tallywood Rally was like the extra game included in that box, and I just never got around to it.
It's a game for 1 to 4 players, and it's a moderately complex game. In this game, you are halfling campaign managers in a local election. Can you manage your candidate and public relations and win the election? I legitimately thought this was going to be a racing game until I opened the box and discovered it was a game about halfling politics. I've only had the chance to play this solo because when I mentioned the theme to my gaming groups, I got this sort of reaction. The gameplay isn't terrible. There's a lot of card play and choosing different actions to take. It's actually quite an involved process, and each turn you'll have a ton of decisions, including choosing between getting a celebrity on your side or working towards an endorsement. This is all serious stuff one would expect in a political game about being a campaign manager, but my brain kept hitting the inside of my skull whenever I thought about the theme. Who is this game for? This one might be better than my first impressions of it, but that theme is just something else. Halfling politics just does not interest me in the slightest. Tallywood Rally! That is a definition of a meh game. I think it's too complex for what it is, and yeah, it's just kind of an ugly, weird looking thing.
This here is Rim Racers, and this was published by Corvus Belli, and they contacted me. We're a wargaming company. You might have heard about war games, which I had, and we're getting into designing board games. We've got some exciting art, some exciting ideas, and we're going to send you the first game. And I was really amped about that. And then Rim Racers turned up.
Rim Racers. It's a game for 2 to 5 players, and it's a moderately complex game. You are remote drone racing drivers engaged in a fierce competition. Can you outrace and outfight your opponents in a competition where Formula 1 meets BattleBots? Hey, this game was made by Corvus Belli, a company that does the Infinity Skirmish war game, a game with some amazing world building and tons of praise for its fun gameplay. Rim Racers is not Infinity, it's infinity times worse than that. It looks good at least, and the racer models in particular are nice. And I think there'll be quite a few people who look at the models and the controller player boards and think to themselves, oh, this looks like it'll be fun. It's not. It's a fiddly mess with a terrible rulebook. It came out just after Heat turned racing games on their head, and Rim Racers feels old and awkward in comparison. And the idea that racing games would be cooler if you could just attack each other just isn't true. It's just frustrating, and not in a good way like Robo Rally. Next we have Rim Racers, and that gets fired into the sun. Racing games should be fun. They should be about racing. This one doesn't really know what it wants to do. It's a racing battler. It has an awful movement system, and overall it's just a very, very disappointing game.
This might be a little tricky to read, but this is Dark Deeds 2nd Edition. I'm not even sure if this game is out yet based on the number of people who own it on BGG and how many votes it has. But I've had it for quite some time. And yeah, I don't recall asking for this one. I think I'm on a Modifius list or something, and they just send me the occasional game. So yeah, this one I don't think is going to have enough interest to warrant a full review, but here's the short review.
It's a game for 2 to 5 players, and it's a reasonably simple game. In Dark Deeds, you are hired goons. Apparently, we can't use that word anymore. Please do not look it up. In Dark Deeds, you are the lackeys of an evil patron. They have set you a list of terrible things to do in order to prove your loyalty to them. Dark Deeds is pretty good, and it was designed by Andy Chambers, who used to do a lot of design work for Warhammer many, many years ago. There's a street that we laid out with cards with replacements to one side. On your turn, you'll try to sneak past guards, rob people, and generally be a ne'er-do-well. You'll also try to get loot and win the favour of your patron, while trying not to arouse too much suspicion. This is very much a light game that you can play for half an hour. It's probably a little long for what it is, but what it is a simple game with a devilishly fun theme and has a ton of backstabbing and betrayal built in. Dark Deeds. I think Dark Deeds is actually pretty fun. It's a good game, just not necessarily for me. It could end up being in here as a flawed but keeping it anyway, because I might want to give another play with my group, so I might put it up here. It's actually not too bad.
The people who made All or Nothing Wrestling keep asking me when the review's going to be. I keep saying it's coming up, that I'm going to get the game to the table, and I have. And yeah, it's fine. There's just not enough interest in this game to warrant a full review, so here it is. I really wanted this one to be a little bit better than it is because I love the enthusiasm this company has. They clearly love professional wrestling and everything about it, and I really want them to succeed. So hopefully with a little snippets of information I give you about this game, you might like the look of it and go check it out.
It's a game for 1 to 4 players, and it's a reasonably simple game. You are a professional wrestler, just about to enter the ring for the main event. Can you pin your opponent to the mat and win the match? I am somewhat of a pro wrestling fan. I started watching when Hulk Hogan was a big star, and have watched on and off ever since. I've watched in excess of 200 wrestling pay-per-views, so I was quite eager to take a look at the game. I was very surprised to see it had Kurt Angle, Randy Savage, Andre the Giant, and Davey Boy Smith in it. 4 wrestlers I really liked. I'm glad to report their likenesses are used under license, which is very cool for a small game. It does some really fun stuff. Firstly, the game is all about momentum. Unlike a lot of games where you alternate attacks, here you keep on hitting and you keep on attacking. There are ways to defend and there are reversals, and it's nicely back and forth, but in its own way that feels like wrestling. It's fun enough, if a little basic. It is just a fighting game. What I really want though is a game about booking wrestling, not fighting the matches themselves.
And while I'm saying here that the game is mostly just fighting, there is a solo mode that is quite detailed and impressive. It's like a campaign mode, a little bit like the Road to WrestleMania segments from the old wrestling games. And it comes with all these campaign events. The long and the short of it is, they all end in doing a fight, but at least it's a fight with some narrative.
All or Nothing. Yeah, All or Nothing's good for what it is, which is a pro wrestling themed battling game. I kind of want more from my wrestling games than this, but yeah, if you want a wrestling battling game, it's pretty good.
Monty Python and the Holy Grail of the game. Be careful what you wish for, because you might ask for a review copy of something, and it might end up being this.
It's a game for 2 to 5 players, and it's a reasonably simple game. You are the Knights of the Round Table, questing to find the Holy Grail. This is a very basic competitive questing game, a little like Talisman, but not remotely as good. It's like a roll and move, but without the rolling and with tons of card play. Here you'll move to locations and play cards and go, hey, remember that thing from the movie? Wasn't that fun? Then you'll go to another location and go, hey, remember that thing from the movie? Wasn't that fun? If this wasn't Monty Python themed, no one would touch it. And the Grail quests have you playing cards against opponents, who draw cards from the deck, and you keep playing cards until the right amount of cards have been played. Or not, who cares? People who belong to fandoms should demand better of the things they are sold. If your defense of this game is that the Black Knight's limbs fall off, or that it comes with coconuts so you can make horse riding sounds, I'm not going to get through to you. Enjoy your game. But if you actually want a game that's more than just some references strung together with some mechanics you'd find in a Hasbro toy store game from the 1980s, just skip it. And finally, Monty Python's Quest for the Holy Grail. Unsurprisingly, that gets fired into the sun. So final look at the rankings here. And you can see, yeah, there are a lot of games here that I kind of want to get rid of. And a lot of games here I just didn't think were worth reviewing. And only one game I would have given the gold medal to. And it's such a simple game that there's no way I'm doing a full 3-minute video on that. Yeah, I feel pretty comfortable with this list. I think everything's in probably the right place.
So that's the end of this video. An absolute mixed bag of games, of good ones, bad ones, terrible ones, awful ones, forgettable ones, and ones you're going to be looking back and going, what was that game called again? If there are any games in this video you think I should do a detailed, proper 3-minute review of, let me know in the comments. And based on my opinions here, are there any games you think, hey, he didn't like that for that reason, I reckon he'd like this one, or, oh, you like the aspect from that game, you're gonna like this. Let me know about those in the comments as well. And a reminder, 3-Minute Board Games does not do paid content. Please keep us independent by supporting us on Patreon, or by checking out my new book, 100 Round Board Games to Try Before You Die of Boredom. That book is available for pre-order worldwide right now. It would really help me out a bunch if you went and pre-ordered that. And until next time, take care. Ka kite ano.